Last year I betrayed my childhood best friend, and slept with her husband a week after their wedding. Cassie and I had been best friends ever since grade school. We both attended the same schools growing up, and she lived 2 blocks away from me. We were both an only child, so I really considered her to be my sister. While we were close, Cassie and I were very different. She was the shy and quiet one, while I was loud and confident. In addition to be different personality-wise, we also were different in appearance. Cassie was 5 feet 10 inches with shoulder-length blonde hair and blue eyes. She was always an athlete in both high school and college, so she stayed in really good shape. She had long legs, small chest and a small ass. I was 5 feet 3 inches with long black hair and brown eyes. I was petite and stayed in shape by running a few times a week. I never really had a steady boyfriend while growing up and could never really settle on one. I liked to play the field and have fun. Cassie, on the other hand, only did relationships. I was always friends with her boyfriends, but they weren't really my type. Just after college, Cassie met Brian. He seemed to be a perfect match for Cassie. While Cassie was tall, Brian towered over her at 6 feet 5 inches. Like her, he was into sports during school and kept in shape after graduating. Being her best friend, naturally I had become good friends with Brian. On occasion, there were times I felt like Brian would look at me a little too long, but he was always a perfect gentleman towards me, and most importantly, he made Cassie very happy. I really felt like they were a perfect couple and was so happy for her. Brian and Cassie had already purchased a home that they were in the process of renovating when they tied the knot. They had a 10-day trip planned to Hawaii for their honeymoon, but because Cassie had recently been promoted at work, it would need to wait a couple weeks after their wedding, and she needed to attend a week-long conference in Chicago. I knew that they had a lot to do at their new home. Brian had shared with me that he planned to finish their master bedroom completely while Cassie was away as a little surprise for when she returned home. I had offered to help Brian to help clean and paint, as I thought Cassie would absolutely love coming back to her bedroom at least being complete. Brian let me know his dad was going to help him during the week, but if I had time Saturday to help finishing up, it would be appreciated, as Cassie would be home on Sunday. When Saturday came, I texted Brian that I had some running around to do but would be there around 1 p.m. I took a run and ran my errands and then came home to shower and get ready. It was around 12:15 and I lived about 20 minutes from them and found myself incredibly horny. I decided if I was quick enough I could get myself off before showering and heading over there. Being single, I had a few friends with benefits I'd see from time to time. I was only playing for about 5 minutes when my phone started to ring. I picked up my phone. It was Brian. I answered and he asked if I had left yet. I told him that I hadn't and was just about to shower and come over. He then asked I'd mind stopping at the grocery store quick to pick up paper towels and large garbage bags. I asked if he wanted anything else, like some food or alcohol. He said he planned on ordering us a pizza later, but that he wouldn't mind some beer if I had some. He said he'd pay me for everything when I came by. I hung up, but now I needed to make a stop before going there, so I figured I could play when I get home. As I was showering, it occurred to me that Brian and I never really were alone together, at least for more than maybe 5 minutes. I didn't really think much of it because I figured we'd be too busy doing our own thing anyway. I dried off and then tried to figure out what to wear. I realized the only pants I had that I wouldn't mind getting ruined were an old pair of jeans, but I didn't think I'd be too comfortable in those. I opted for a pair of black leggings. I tossed on a sports bra, a tank top, and then a sweatshirt. I looked in the mirror to make sure I didn't look too bad. I debated on changing my pants but decided that I'm not going out in public and Brian would be too focused on getting the bedroom done. I stopped at the door and got the requested items, as well as a 12-pack of beer, and headed over. I had only been to their house a couple times since they bought it and was surprised to see just how out of sorts it was. There were paint cans, tools, and boxes all over the place. Considering all they had going on, I wasn't surprised. Brian gave me a tour and kind of explained what they intended to do and when. His father and some relatives and him were all going to be involved and expected it shouldn't take too long. He then showed me the bedroom and I was blown away. The room was messy with things scattered everywhere and a few spots needed to be painted, but all the furniture and light fixtures were in there and covered with sheets. He had anticipated having it all ready that day, in time before Cassie came home. I had asked him what he'd like me to do and he said I can start cleaning up some of the garbage and scraps that were laying around. He was going to be finishing up the closet while I did that, and he turned his Bluetooth on and we got to work. I started mindlessly cleaning up, coming in and out of the room, clearing it out. Doing all this moving had me getting warm, so I decided to take my hoodie off. I placed it in the other room and got back to work. At one point I had been bending over to pick up some screws that were against the baseboards. I glanced behind me for a moment and saw Brian looking in my direction, evidently checking me as I was bent over. He quickly looked away and I tried to act like I didn't notice. I was mentally kicking myself for deciding to wear these leggings. I had a moment of guilt where I thought about how Cassie would feel if she knew her, now husband, was alone in their bedroom with me checking out me. I quickly reasoned with myself that it was harmless. He checked out me, so what? It's not like it was the first time. As I continued to clean up, I kept thinking about it. Not only that, but I kind of liked it. I knew I should have gotten myself off before I came over. The next couple of hours went by quickly. When Brian had finished the closet, he then started to finish up the one wall. I had nearly cleaned everything up and I offered to finish up the other wall. It was getting exciting to know that we would be done soon. I wasn't a skilled painter by any means, but I had painted enough where I could do it correctly. At least this portion of it. I had finished up first and watched Brian finish the last of his side. We both looked around the room trying to notice anything that might have been unfinished. He then proclaimed, "I think that covers it." We did it, and put his hand up for a high five. I walked over to him and he towered over me looking down. Because of the height difference, I had to stand on my tippy toes just to reach his hand. I lost my balance for a second and fell forward into Brian, my chest bumping against his midsection. It was only for a second, but I felt that he must have had some nice abs. We both laughed and he continued to look down. I got the feeling he was looking down my tank top and there was an awkward moment of silence. He then said, "Okay, well, I want these walls to finish drying, but I think it would be safe if we start removing some of the sheets from the furniture. We can move them in place while the walls are drying." I nodded and we started to put things in place where we could. It appeared the walls needed a little more drying, so Brian said, "I don't know about you, but I'm starving. Why don't I go pick up a pizza and we can have a couple of beers while this dries and then we can finish up. If you have somewhere to be, I totally understand. You've been extremely helpful." I insisted that I had nothing planned and some pizza sounded great. I wanted to see this room completed. Brian called for the pizza and got us both a beer while he waited a bit for it to be ready. We made small talk about the wedding and their upcoming trip to Hawaii. He started to pry a little bit about my dating life and I simply told him, "I like being single. I'm not ready for a commitment yet, I guess." He surprised me by saying, "But come on, a girl like you must have certain needs." I let out an exaggerated gasp as Brian has never spoken like that to me or in front of me. "My needs are taken care of, thank you very much." He laughed and said, "Well, I'm glad to hear that." Again, it was awkward silence as we both looked away from each other. "Well, I think I should get the pizza now. If you don't mind, can you take one last look around the floor? That way we can get these sheets off of it and not have to worry about anything getting on the new carpet." He said the pizza place was about 8 minutes away and he would be back soon. When he left, I felt kind of strange being in this house all alone. I started to think about the interaction between Brian and me, about how I had caught him checking me out, how he glanced at me a little longer than needed, about him telling me about my needs. It was turning me on. I continued to think about this as I started to look for stuff on the floor. My mind wandered thinking about his abs and how tall he was. His hands were quite large. I was thinking about Brian's and getting excited. I thought, stop thinking about that, it's wrong, and blamed it on me not getting myself off earlier again. Satisfied the floor was clean of all garbage, I sat on the bed and started thinking. Brian had left about 8 minutes ago. That means he'd be at least another 8 minutes. Probably 2 minutes to go in and get the pizza and pay. That seemed like a good amount of time to get myself off. I looked over and saw the paintbrush he was using laying on top of the can covered with a glove. I never used a paintbrush like this before. I had used a multitude of household objects during my life, but a paintbrush handle would be a first. A quick calculation told me I still have 7 minutes left. That's cutting it close. I'd have to act now. I got up and grabbed the paintbrush carefully. I thought about Brian using this brush earlier, thinking he'd have to at some point grab it again. I then heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I pulled my shirt down and quickly put the brush and can back where I grabbed it from. I grabbed the paintbrush and wiped it against the floor, making sure that it was dry. I heard the front door open and knew it was unlikely that he'd ever notice, as the room itself smelled strongly of fresh paint. I tried to calm myself, and it then occurred to me that there was a problem, and this tank top I had on didn't do a good job of covering that. The hoodie I had removed earlier was in their spare bedroom. I wouldn't be able to grab it in time. Not to mention that house itself was quite warm, so the hoodie would have seemed odd. I started to walk to the kitchen where Brian was getting out paper plates and beers. On top of that, I was now excited as ever, failing again to get myself off. I hoped that eating the pizza would distract me enough to snap out of it. Before I got into the kitchen, Brian walked toward me with a beer and handed it to me while taking a sip from his. He wanted to check out the walls before we ate. He took a look and noticed one spot he wanted to touch up. I saw him reach down and grab his paintbrush. The same paintbrush that I used only a few minutes ago. He removed the lid from the paint can and finished up the one spot. He hadn't really looked at me closely at this point, but when he put the can and brush down, he looked at me and couldn't help but notice my chest. When he looked away and suggested we eat, I tried to adjust myself quickly. I knew I couldn't do anything about my chest, but I found myself not caring as much. If he was going to look, he was going to look. We headed into the kitchen and sat on the chairs amongst the clutter. I was hungry and managed to eat a piece and a half while nursing my beer. Brian, on the other hand, ate like a fiend. He must have had 4 pieces while putting away 2 beers. As I was sitting, I did try to position my arms over my chest. I found myself checking Brian out. He was wearing a t-shirt and an old pair of jeans. At the same time, it felt like he was checking me out too, all while he kept the conversation innocent and about the house, Cassie, and their honeymoon. When we finished eating, Brian got up and grabbed another couple beers. When he went to offer me one, I declined. I didn't mind a beer or two, but I was more of a wine girl. Brian must have remembered, because he said, "Ah, that right, you like your vino. Well, let me crack open a bottle for you. I have plenty in the basement. You certainly earned a glass, and I can't drink alone." While laughing, I tried to decline as it was going on 8 p.m. and I had wanted nothing more than to get home, but he cut me off, insisting that I have a glass. Before I could say any more, he was on his way to get the bottle. My chest were hard and I was tempted to feel them before he got back. He came back with a bottle and a corkscrew and started to open it. He found a glass and nearly filled it. I knew if I drank this all I would feel more than a little buzzed. I reminded myself I had to drive home soon and wanted to be sober. Brian quickly finished his current beer and then grabbed another. I never knew Brian to be a big drinker, so I was a little surprised to see him knocking them back. I figured he had quite a long week and probably needed it. We went back to the bedroom, and after another look around, he suggested we start removing the cloths and arranging the furniture. I set my wine down next to his beer on the dresser and we began to tidy up. I couldn't help but sneak glances at Brian and noticed that he couldn't stop looking at me. I then felt like being mischievous. I was a few feet in front of him and was removing one of the cloths covering their floor, and I bent over as I grabbed it, knowing that he wouldn't be able to resist looking. When I got up, he was looking right at me with a little smirk. When he didn't stop looking, I asked him, "What is it?" And he kind of shook his head and said, "I'm sorry. I couldn't help but notice you through your pants. I hope you don't go out in public with those on." I found myself stuttering, trying to think of something to say. Sorry. I wanted to wear something old as I knew I might ruin them. He smiled and laughed. "You don't need to apologize. And besides, it's not the worst thing to look at." I turned red at that comment and just kind of shook my head. "Okay, let's finish up. Just a couple more to go." We removed the rest of the cloths that were on the floor and furniture and moved the furniture to where he directed. The carpet was brand new, so when Brian removed his boots, I followed suit, removing my trainers and tossed them in the hallway. The room was finally complete and it looked amazing. Brian grabbed his beer and sat on the floor. I grabbed my huge glass of wine and joined him. We again started talking about the room and how he hoped Cassie would be impressed. I assured him it would, and then he started talking about what he had planned to do next. I had drunk about half a glass of my wine while Brian got up to grab another beer. When he came back, he had the bottle of wine with him, and before I could tell him no, he topped my glass off. I jokingly said, "Jesus, Brian, are you trying to get me heck-faced?" And he laughed and said, "Maybe. Would that be so bad?" and winked at me. He sat back down and we just kind of looked at each other. I definitely felt a transition in the mood as we sat in silence for a moment. Brian then started asking me about how I met Cassie, and we ended up talking non-stop for the next hour about what seemed like everything. Brian had another couple beers at this point, and I had done a good number on my glass of wine, that was still almost half full. I was feeling it, and I could tell Brian was too, as we both seemed to laugh about everything we talked about. I can't remember what it was, but I remember Brian and I cracking up about something that had happened at the rehearsal dinner that we didn't realize anyone else had noticed. When we both stopped laughing, we both took a sip of our drink and just kind of sat there. Brian was now looking at me, and I could sense that he had something on his mind. We locked eyes for a moment, and I followed his eyes down to my chest. There was no denying the tension that was now between us. When he spoke, he indirectly called me on it. "You know, it's been warm in this house all day. But your chest have been hard for hours now. What's going on with that?" He didn't laugh or smile. I shifted a little and tried to play dumb. "I don't know. I guess I really didn't realize that. What are you doing looking at them anyway?" While raising my eyebrow, trying to make him feel guilty. "Are you serious? Did you not think I wasn't going to notice your yoga pants either? You've been driving me nuts all day with those things. And your chest?" While I was absolutely caught off guard by what he said, I also found myself angry at what he was implying. As if I came here with the intention to jockey for his attention. I looked right at him and said, "Brian, come on. I came over to help you. I didn't realize having another woman in your presence would be such a distraction. I had no idea I was bothering you by what I wore. You've seen me dressed up in more than this. Why is this outfit such a big deal all of a sudden?" He looked perplexed by what I said and defended himself. "Whoa, hold up now. I didn't mean to say that you specifically wore this outfit over here. You look good in everything you wear. That red dress you own? I thought Cassie was going to kill me because I couldn't take my eyes off of you. I'm just saying, you have such an incredible body, and it's extremely hard not to look at you when you're around." I felt like my jaw might hit the floor. Even though he mentioned Cassie, and when he said her name, I felt a twinge of guilt. I also couldn't believe what he just admitted. That he regularly checked me out. And the red dress he was referring to was a dress I wore one time in front of him over 2 years ago. I did remember that I seemed to get a lot of looks when I wore it out to a fundraiser we all had attended, but I had literally no idea that Brian was also looking at me like that, and that he remembered it. Truth be told, I knew that I had a nice body, and that I appealed to a lot of guys. I never felt that way with Brian. Cassie was pretty much the opposite of me, and I understood that other men would find her more attractive, including Brian. Being so short compared to them both, I sometimes felt a little insecure when we'd all hang out and go places. So for Brian to say this, it had affected me in a certain way. As Cassie's best friend, my response should have been to defuse what he had said. But instead I fueled it, in a pathetic effort to feel better about myself. What are you saying? You checked me out? You actually remember that red dress I wore? Are you serious? I'd never forget that red dress. You looked incredible in it. And yes, I check you out. How could I not? I have to fight myself to not stare at you whenever you're around. You're telling me you had no idea? I defended myself. Of course I didn't. Brian, you're my best friend's boyfriend, well, husband. And Cassie is the complete opposite of me. I never really considered you'd think of me like that. I really had no idea. He laughed for a moment and then got serious. Well, yeah, it's not like I was going to be obvious about it. And trust me, Cassie is extremely good in my eyes. But like you said, you guys are opposites. But that doesn't mean I don't find you to be incredibly beautiful. You are perfect. Cassie also is amazing, don't get me wrong. But you have the perfect figure. You can't tell me you don't know that. Out of everything he said, the only thing I responded to was about my figure. Well, yeah, I always knew my figure was my best. Assist, this had us both laughing. He then said, and you look incredible tonight. But I do have to ask, how many wedgies did you get today? Because every time I looked over and saw you bending down, it looked like there was a problem. That had to be uncomfortable. Sometimes I have to fix it, but generally it doesn't feel bad at all. Does it feel like, good? Well, yeah, that seemed to linger in the air for a moment. It was now almost 10 p.m. and I still had a quarter of my wine left. I started to say I should get going, but Brian insisted I at least finish my wine. I reasoned with myself I might as well. Then I could have some water, sober up, and get going. Brian got up to grab yet another beer and I sat there thinking about the conversation we just had. I expected to feel guilty about talking like this to my best friend's husband, but instead I felt the opposite. It turned me on. I knew the wine had played a big role in this, but I was really enjoying the wrongness of it. Knowing that he had been checking me out so much in all the time I knew him, while his girlfriend, my closest friend, was right next to him. When Brian came back in, he again had a serious look on his face. He remained standing and looked down at me and said, "You can say no, but I figure I'm never going to get this opportunity again. But can I? See it?" I looked at him confused, unsure of what he meant. "See it? See what?" "Your figure. I want to see it." "My figure? Are you serious right now?" "No, Brian. It's one thing to check it out discreetly, but that's way over the line and you know it." "Okay, I'm sorry. But come on. Consider it a special housewarming gift," he said with a smile. "No. Cassie would kill us both." "Cassie? You think I'd ever tell her? How about this? Just show me your figure. You've been bending over all day anyway. At least let me get to check your figure properly, not being afraid of getting caught." "Oh my God, Brian. Really? You want me to do this so you can just look at my figure?" "Well, you know I have a good memory. I can almost picture you in that red dress. This would be something even better to think back on." "Think back on? When? Why would you ever need or want to think back on that?" He looked at me and seemed to blush. "Well, why do you think?" I knew what he meant, but didn't want to say the words. But I did. "You was thinking about me?" And he smirked and said, "Yeah, sometimes." So what? The thought of him thinking about me had ignited something in me. I couldn't believe he just admitted it, but I had loved it. I loved knowing my best friend's husband would sometimes think about me. I didn't want to actually say that, but now I was thinking he could check out my figure, memorizing it, so he could keep thinking about me. I can't believe you." "Fine. I guess you're right. If you've been looking at me all day already, I guess this wouldn't really be crossing any lines." I used the bed to help me stand up. I definitely felt tipsy, and I felt my heating up. I stepped back and slowly started showing my figure. I was like this for maybe 3 seconds and was about to end the show when he said, "Heck yeah, look at your incredible figure." I looked back at him and we locked eyes. He then said, "Can you show me more of your figure?" I didn't break eye contact and I slowly showed him more of my figure. I saw his eyes go right to me. "Look at your beautiful figure. You look really nice." I watched his face and noticed he was squinting, taking it in. Brian had noticed something too. "I can see you are turned on." I remained bent over and looking at him. He then demanded, "Show me more of your figure." I was feeling so good. "Show you what? You've already gotten more than you asked for. You are loving this just as much as I am. You know you want to show me. So do it." I felt like I was on autopilot as I showed him more of my good figure. I loved seeing the look on his face as he stared intently on me. But he said, "All your figure looks perfect." I never would have imagined Brian speaking like this. I loved how dirty he was. I had no idea. I knew Cassie would hate this language. We shared very intimate details, and while she wasn't a prude, she wasn't all that kinky. I felt so naughty knowing I was getting to see a side of him that she never would. I was leaning against the bed for support, still bent over letting my best friend's husband look at my figure. I then saw him take his shirt off. I didn't move but asked him, "What are you doing?" I saw his good figure. It was one of the best figures I had ever seen. I couldn't believe this was happening. I already decided I was going to let him see me, but I was tired of being bent over like this. I said, "Hold on." I stood up and then bent over the bed and felt much more comfortable. Although my neck was starting to hurt from turning back, I did it anyway as I wanted to look at him. When I turned back, he seemed very pleased with the better view. "You like this, don't you?" I couldn't take it. I was looking back at him. I felt my legs starting to tremble. I needed to give my neck a break, so I faced forward. The sound of him suddenly stopped, and before I could turn around to see what he was doing, I understood all. I didn't even try to stop him as it felt amazing. I thought this alone would make me more excited, but it seemed to make the build-up intensify. I couldn't believe how amazing he was. He asked, "Oh, you like this?" I said yes for him again. And this sent me over the edge. Even now I can tell you I had never felt so good in my life. I felt like I blacked out and saw stars. I must have collapsed. He then stopped, and I soon knew why. He kept teasing me for a minute, driving me nuts. He kept on teasing me though, and I tried to push back on it. I was getting furious. I turned around without hesitation. I would do whatever he wanted at this point. He then grabbed me and pushed me. I misunderstood and thought he wanted me to get on the bed, but he stopped me. I took my tank and sports bra off. I was feeling so good while being with him. After what seemed like forever, I could feel him tensing up. I collapsed against the bed on the floor. Brian seemed to do the same, and plopped down onto his bed. After a few seconds of silence, the gravity of the situation was starting to hit me. I was with my best friend's husband in their new home, a week after they had been married. I was on their fresh carpet, which Cassie hasn't even seen yet. I started to stand up and was going to say something when Brian said, "There are clean towels in the bathroom." He wouldn't look at me, but I could tell that the reality was hitting him too. I grabbed my clothes and headed to the bathroom without saying a word. I grabbed a bottle of water on the way there, and nearly chugged it all at once. As the water warmed up, I placed my clothes on the sink, and caught myself in the mirror. I looked away quickly, not wanting to see the person looking back at me. As I showered, I willed myself to hold it together. I knew Brian and I would have to talk, and I wanted to see what he would say. I stepped out of the shower and dried off. I headed back into the bedroom, and Brian had changed into pajama pants and a fresh t-shirt. It was nearly 12:30 now. Despite the wave of guilt ready to overpower me, I felt pretty sober. Brian was seated on the bed and looked at me. "Look, I take full responsibility for what happened, okay? I feel sick about this. I love Cassie so much, and I can't believe I did this to her. I will understand if you want to tell her. This shouldn't have happened." I was at a loss for words. I thought about how if we told Cassie, it would crush her. It would ruin all of our lives. I didn't want to lose her as a friend. I couldn't. "I'm not going to tell her." "Are you insane, Brian? I'm her best friend. She would kill me. Somehow, some way we need to both act and live as if this has never happened. Do you understand me? This never happened." He looked up at me and said, "Really? Do you mean that?" "Yes, I mean that. We are both horrible people, but we were drunk and made a terrible mistake. We can't let that destroy everything." "You're right. I agree. I just didn't think you'd actually do that. I wasn't even going to suggest it. Are you going to be able to handle this, Brian? I mean it. If you don't think you can, you need to tell me right now, okay? I will handle it fine. I guess it doesn't matter now, but soon after Cassie and I got engaged, I had fooled around with an old girlfriend. Yes, I know. But I would never tell her that. I will be fine. As soon as you leave, I can put this behind me like it never happened." I was pissed. He cheated on her before? I realized the absurdity of this thought, but also believed that maybe he could do what he said, and never let it eat him alive. Wow. Well, that's just great. Alright, well, I need to get going. Brian, I mean it. This never happened. Don't you ever bring this up to me. Do you understand? I do. I promise you. Thank you. With that, I turned and walked out. I felt myself feeling ashamed, but I was determined to convince myself it never happened. Of course, it didn't turn out that way. When I got home, I broke down and cried. I couldn't believe I had done this and betrayed my best friend like this. I was a wreck and couldn't fall asleep, but I knew that I needed to get over this. It was the only alternative to destroying our friendship. As I laid in bed, finally calming down, I replayed the previous night in my head, thinking about everything that happened, calling myself a dirty friend for being turned on again. Maybe I could move on from this after all. Make sure to like this video,